Absolutely.
Okay. And so when the FBI censored the United States government, you wouldn't have to just take it down by calling Meta or Google, would you?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm following the
Are you familiar with the official verified Russian language account of the United States Department of State that was taken down at your agency's request?
It doesn't ring a bell as I sit here right now. No.
Okay, well, now you have something to take back and look at.
Okay.
Because, in fact, in this bundle that SBU constantly was submitting to various agencies was, in fact, a Russian language statement of the government. Literally, you took down the free speech of the Department of State.
So,
yes, go
I
ahead.
mentioned SBU. I'm not sure we're talking about the same thing, but I will endeavor to provide a little more context, at least as to SBU.
Yes.
I believe what you may be referring to, but I'm not sure we're talking about the same thing, is that when Russia invaded Ukraine, the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, which is a long-standing good partner of the FBI, asked us for help on a whole range of things. And one of those things was to contact U.S. companies on their behalf because the Russians, the invasion, had cut off Ukraine's communications. And so we did pass through information from the SBU to social media.
Are you also familiar with the fact that President Zelensky has had to clean house at the SBU?
I know there have been a number of personnel changes.
Okay. Well, we'll follow up with this in more detail. The question I have for you is, you're the premier law enforcement operation, and you're a former Department of Justice, high-ranking executive at all levels. So, would you agree that the job of the FBI is criminal investigation?
Like I said again, when you look at how we're being played by the elite assholes, and you see how they just throw commercials on here, it's some bullshit. I mean, just constantly throw commercials back to back to back to back, and you can't even turn bitches off like talking about no more. And I don't like this not one bit. I stopped watching regular fucking TV because of fucking commercials.
It's criminal investigation and to protect the country from national security threats. Those two things.
So, the idea that you take information and you have it taken down, use your authority and the leverage you have to have Meta, Google, Facebook, or Facebook being Meta, or Twitter, take down people's information on things like where COVID came from. Where do you find the national security interest in that? Where do you find the interest in free speech of American citizens being taken down? And I repeat, free speech of American citizens. Where do you have that authority?
So we don't ask social media companies to censor information or suppress information when it comes to national security threats, certainly. So what we do is alert them when some other intelligence agency gives us information about a foreign intelligence service being behind some account. We will call social media companies' attention to that. But at the end of the day, we're very clear that it's up to the social media companies to decide whether to do something about it.
The suggestion of the most powerful law enforcement operation is not a suggestion. It is, in fact, effectively an order, Mr. Chairman.
Now we're about to get this little Sambo nigga here. He don't even know how much they playing his Sambo ass. Look. Sambo nigga here, boy.
Donald Trump, their savior, no matter how unfounded or dangerous it may be to do so. Welcome to the legislative arm of the Trump re-election campaign. A grand jury found probable cause that, among other crimes, Trump illegally kept highly sensitive national security documents, which could put our country and others and our sources in danger.
I stop right there. But Joe Biden took classified information home, and he was not a president. He was a vice president. He was supposed to take that out the skill. So, if they're gonna be prosecuting Donald Trump for the same shit that Joe Biden did, Donald Trump is the president. He can unclassify shit. What can Joe Biden do? Why did Joe Biden have all of these classified documents at his motherfucking house? And Joe Biden he didn't have Secret Service then. I'm just being honest. Donald Trump had Secret Service watching his boxes. I'm just being honest.
If they got out, and which photographs show Trump kept those records in bathrooms, showers, closets,
But
and
he
in
had,
the
but he had
Mar-a-Lago
Secret Service.
ballroom.
But he had Secret Service.
MAGA Republicans are afraid that the justice system might hold Trump accountable for his actions.
Man,
So to
justice
protect
system
them,
ain't gonna hold.
Republicans are trying to intimidate
It'll hold.
FBI
It'll hold.
officials.
It'll hold Donald
And in
Trump
case that does
accountable.
not work,
Joe
Republicans
Biden.
are trying their hardest to discredit the FBI in the eyes of the American public. When Trump lost in
FBI
2020,
discredited
they
their own
tried
damn
to make
self.
Americans distrust their election systems.
And you
And
can't
now
trust
that
the
the
election system.
FBI and the Justice Department have sought to hold Trump to the same standard any other American citizen would be held to, MAGA Republicans are telling Americans not to trust the FBI. To protect Trump, Republicans are trying to distract us from the real work that the FBI does every day, which is fighting violent criminals,
This is a
child
fucking joke,
predators,
man.
and fighting domestic terrorists and extremists so as
They
to
don't do
protect
none
our
of that. They
democracy
don't do
and
none
our
of that. That's
national
why we don't
security.
need the FBI.
And even worse, MAGA Republicans are stirring up threats that pose a danger to the safety of FBI employees. It's past
Yeah,
time
truly
that
got too many
Republicans
FBI employees.
realize the
30 fucking
consequences of
thousand
their
of
words
motherfuckers.
and put the good
God
of this
damn.
country over politics. Now, Director Ray, I want to thank you for your service during a time of unprecedented travail. Um, Director Ray, you were a partner in an international law firm before you took a drastic pay cut to
He was a
accept
legal
the job
line
of
lawyer.
FBI director.
Like
Isn't that
basically
correct?
all these assholes are.
Yes, it's something
Lawyer.
my wife
Liar.
reminds me of from time to time.
And but let me ask you this, sir. And you took this office after Trump fired the former FBI
Yeah, 'cause he
director
had to.
Jim Comey.
He had
correct?
to.
Yes, sir.
And did you contact the
They
Trump
thought that he was
administration
trustworthy.
to offer
Come to find
yourself
out that he wasn't.
for this job, or
He must
did
be on
the
the Epstein
administration
Island.
recruit you for the job?
They contacted me and asked me if I would be willing to consider taking on the role.
So Trump handpicked you to be the FBI director,
Yes.
and he expected you to do what he wanted you to do, correct?
Well, that I can't speak to. I can tell you the same thing I told him.
put it like
Listen,
this.
I'm going to do this job by the book.
He's unhappy with you now, isn't he?
I'll let him speak for himself.
Well, I think a lot of his acolytes here reflect his intent at this particular time. Director Ray, are you aware that MAGA Republicans have repeatedly called for the FBI to be defunded?
Fuck, they
I
finally
have
get
heard
rid
some
of them
that
bitches.
language.
In fact, Republicans on this very committee have said that your institution should be dismantled.
Yes,
Isn't
it
that
should
correct?
be. It should be.
Well, I think certain members have.
And one member even tweeted, quote, defund and dismantle the FBI, end quote.
Yep.
Another
Defund
told
them
Fox
and dismantle
News
them
that,
bitches.
quote, Republicans should defund the bureaucracy, end quote. And a third told the press that he thinks the FBI, quote, needs to be split up and moved out into pieces, end quote. Those are direct quotes and only a small sample of what's out there. Can you briefly describe for us what the effect would be on our national security and on our domestic tranquility if the FBI were to be defunded or dismantled?
Well, certainly it would be disastrous for 38,000 hardworking career law enforcement professionals and their families, but more importantly, in many ways, it would hurt our great state and local law enforcement partners who depend on us every day to work with them on a whole slew of challenging threats. It would hurt the American people, neighborhoods.
But y'all
and
trying to make
communities
it
all
seem
across
like
this
y'all
country.
needed. Y'all are not needy.
The people
We
who are
don't need
protected
y'all. We
from
don't need
cartels,
38,
violent
30,
criminals,
fuck, I
gang
don't give a
members,
fuck how many of
predators,
y'all is.
foreign
We don't need
domestic
all y'all.
terrorists,
We don't.
cyber
Y'all
attacks,
be
I could
doing
go
a
on
fucked
and on.
up
The people
job.
it would
Y'all
help
getting paid for
would be
doing
those
shit.
same violent gangs and cartels, foreign terrorists, Chinese spies, hackers, and so forth.
A member.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Director Ray, thank you. Thank you for your work with the FBI, and thank you for your history of work in law enforcement. You started out as an AUSA, and I'm getting this information from Wikipedia, the great font of knowledge in the digital age, so I'm assuming that it's true, but you started out as an AUSA. You were nominated by Republican President Bush for the position of Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division at the Department of Justice, and you were confirmed by a Republican Senate, if I am correct in that.
Yes, by unanimous voice vote.
And you were then nominated by Republican President Donald Trump to be the FBI director, and again confirmed by the Republican Senate for that position.
Yes, I think there were only 5 votes against me, and they were all from Democrats.
Nah, you had to laugh at that deal because that don't do nothing but just tell the truth on the whole truth to the matter. Democrat rats funded him. That's why he came in there and straight up sabotaged Donald Trump's whole presidency. All of them did that, man. You can say that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. He is. And there they go again with this fucking throwing commercials on the motherfucker. I do not like all these fucking commercials, but I'm not gonna pay y'all not to have none. Fuck it. I play the commercial.
According to Wikipedia, you're still a registered Republican, and I hope you don't change your party affiliation after this hearing is over. But I want to thank you. I want to thank you for leading an agency, as you mentioned in your opening statement, that protects Americans from foreign terrorists. That an agency that protects Americans from spies from China and Russia, and cybercrime and public corruption and organized crime and drug cartels and human traffickers and white collar criminals. And I want to thank you and the FBI for protecting law-abiding Americans from the evil that exists all around us. Director Ray, you know this, but it's worth mentioning again anyway. The FBI doesn't protect America because this is a beautiful country. It doesn't protect America just because of the citizens who live in this country. You and the FBI protect America because of the values that we hold, because of our constitutional republic, because this is a special place, and the rest of the world knows just how special this
And you
place
fucking
is.
it up. And you
Director
fucking
Ray,
it
I'm
up.
concerned about FISA. I'm not concerned about FISA in a partisan way, and frankly, I am not in favor of defunding the FBI, nor am I in favor of splitting up the FBI, nor am I in favor of using the Holman Rule for the FBI director. I'm concerned about FISA because I'm concerned about what makes this place special and the threats to us. And I would love to work with the FBI on how we can protect Americans at the same time protecting the civil liberties of Americans. And that area of FISA is what really concerns me. And I know you have gone to great lengths to try to work with FBI agents on how they access information under 702. And I know that at times it has been successful and at times it has not been successful. But the spirit of FISA and the spirit of our constitutional republic really demands that the FBI culture shift. And it shifts to a place where FBI agents understand that protecting American civil liberties, that protecting the privacy that we all enjoy in this country, even though we screw up, we still enjoy this privacy. And in court, we have the highest burden of proof the world has ever known to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, and that has to be that information has to be gathered by the government in a legal way. And so I fear that we are going to overcorrect on FISA in Congress, that we are going to take away some tools that are necessary because there is a trust factor here that's missing. And I'd love to know how we can draw that line in a way that assures the civil liberties. I agree with my colleague from California, and I don't often agree with folks from California, but I agree with my colleague from California that it is essential that we not get geolocation information from the what I consider criminals at big tech
and that we protect that information for Americans. You, as a law enforcement official, should not know where I am necessarily unless you have probable cause to get that information. I'm also concerned about the ability of law enforcement, and particularly the FBI, to access information. When I go on the internet and I search for a gun vault or I search for a holster, I don't want the government to know that I own a gun. And I think I have that privacy right to make sure the government doesn't know that I own a gun or any other information that I search for on the internet, unless you've got probable cause to make that search. And so I want to ask you a question in the last few seconds, and that is, how can you work on the culture in the FBI and help us reach that sweet spot on FISA?
Well, I thank you for that. Certainly, we started with first principles, try to drive home every day to our entire workforce that our mission is to both protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And we have, on the issue of FISA, clearly had failures in the past. I've been very plain about that. And we've implemented a whole series of reforms. And if you look at the reports that have started to come out now from the FISA court, from ODNI, from the Justice Department, from others who have looked at the effect of our reforms, over and over again, they are showing significant improvement in compliance. We're talking about the most recent FISA court opinion finding 98% compliance and commending us for moving in the right direction. DOJ report found 99% compliance. Our internal audit found a 14% jump up to 96%. These are all separate reports looking at the impact of our reforms. A lot of the public commentary about our failures, and let's be clear, we have had problems, and those problems are unacceptable, and I'm determined with my leadership team to fix them. But those problems almost entirely predate those reforms, even though some of them have just come out recently. And so we're going to keep working at this. That is not a one and done from my perspective. I recognize that we need to work with the Congress on this issue, but this is an incredibly important tool. As you know from your own public service, I'm a prosecutor as well. This is an incredibly important tool to protect the American people from very serious foreign threats.
Time of the gentleman's expired. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Director. I want to pick up where Mr. Buck began as well by thanking you for your service, and I'm glad that we have an opportunity for one Democrat, one Republican in close succession to thank you for your service to the country. You are being attacked and vilified by some of the members of this committee and others outside this committee because the Justice Department and the FBI has had the audacity to investigate serious allegations of criminal conduct by a former president. And I just want a chance to recap how we got to where we are. During the last administration, and for 4 years, the Justice Department took the position, not unprecedented for the department, that a current president could not be indicted. Now, I think that's a flawed matter as a constitutional principle, but nonetheless, that was the view of the Office of Legal Counsel and the Justice Department during the Trump years, that the President of the United States could not be indicted. My Republican colleagues seem to believe that a former president simply cannot be indicted. That would effectively make a president above the law, beyond the reach of the law. And in my view, there would probably only one thing the founders would find more politically precarious and dangerous to our Constitution than the indictment of a president or former president, and that is the failure to indict a president or former president when they have engaged in criminal conduct. The Justice Department, I believe, as Representative Lofgren, my fellow member of the January 6th committee, asserted, took a very long time to begin the investigation of Donald Trump and his involvement in January 6th. I believe it began with urgency when it came to the foot soldiers who broke into the Capitol and assaulted police officers that day. But at least what I could tell from the public record, the activities of the president himself, some of which were a matter of very much of public record, such as his tape-recorded conversation with the Secretary of State in Georgia, in which he badgered the Secretary to, quote, find 11,780 votes that don't exist. While that was the subject of investigation by the local district attorney in Fulton County, did not appear to be the subject of investigation for more than a year by the Justice Department.
To me, that is inexplicable. This was never the kind of case in which you could roll up the foot soldiers on the higher ups because there were multiple lines of effort in this plot to overturn the election. I do think that the appointment of the special counsel has accelerated the investigation of the former president's misconduct, and I think that is a positive step for the department and for the country, so we can get resolution to this. But likewise, with Mar-a-Lago, notwithstanding the protests of my colleagues, there were repeated requests by the archives to get those documents back from the former president. And then when those were unsuccessful, there was a grand jury subpoena that was administered. And when that was unsuccessful, and only when that was unsuccessful, and there was evidence that the former president was still withholding highly classified materials, did the FBI go to the step of a search warrant. That was more than a year and a half after those initial requests. This was anything but a rush to judgment in the Mar-a-Lago case. So I believe the department, if anything, has exercised enormous caution. I would say too much caution in the January 6th committee's work and oversight to proceed against a former president when there are serious and credible allegations of criminal conduct. But I want to thank you for your stewardship during this incredibly difficult time. I don't think there's been a more difficult time for an FBI director. And notwithstanding concerns I have expressed, none of them go to your integrity or your commitment to the country, and I want to thank you for that. Let me ask you about a different topic, although related to January 6th as well. Let me ask you broadly about domestic violent extremism. After an amendment in this committee voted down by the Republicans that we should oversee the increasingly dire threat of domestic violent extremism. One of your recent reports underscored the rise of this prevalent threat, and I'd ask you if you would address it today.
So the rise of domestic violent extremism is something that I and we have been identifying for quite some time. It goes back well before January 6th. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but the Joint Terrorism Task Forces that we hear about so often at the FBI were largely created in response to domestic terrorism, not foreign terrorism. But in my first few years as director, we were identifying this issue more and more, and that's why we elevated in the summer of 2019 racially motivated violent extremism to a national threat priority level. And we saw, I think, about a 40% increase in the number of domestic violent extremism investigations, all before anything to do with January 6th. Obviously, since then, it has continued. But domestic violent extremism cuts across the spectrum from the racially motivated violent extremism, militia violent extremism, anarchist violent extremism, environmental violent extremism, and of course, recently we've had a lot of violent extremism attacks against pro-life facilities, and we're investigating those. So it really covers a wide spectrum, and what they all have in common is three things: violence or threats of violence, motivated by some ideology, and it varies, in violation of federal criminal law. And that's the domestic violent extremism that I'm talking about when I've identified this phenomenon.
Mr. Chairman, could I request unanimous consent to enter into the record two letters, both from David Weiss, the Trump-appointed U.S. Attorney in Delaware, rebutting allegations concerning partiality in the investigation of the Hunter Biden case. Thank you, Director.
Without objection. Director, what's the difference between a traditional Catholic and a radical traditional Catholic?
I'm not an expert on the Catholic orders.
Well, your FBI wrote a memo talking about radical traditional Catholics. I'm just wondering if you could define it for us.
Well, what I can tell you is you're referring to the Richmond product, which was a single product by a single field office, which as soon as I found out about it, I was aghast and ordered it withdrawn and removed from FBI systems.
You were aghast, and why won't you let us talk to the people who put it together?
We are working on finishing an internal review into what happened.
We have to wait. We, the Congress, and the American people have to wait until you do an internal review. It's not a criminal investigation going on here. An internal review before we can talk to the people who wrote this.
When we finish our internal review, which will be very soon, we will come back.
Any idea how many Catholics in America?
Provide a briefing on what we found.
Well, we appreciate the briefing. We want to talk to the people who wrote it. Any idea how many Catholics there are in America, Director?
No, sir.
There's a lot, over 60 million. What percentage of those are radical traditional Catholics, according to the Richmond Field Office of the FBI?
Again, that product is not something that I will defend or excuse. It's something that I thought was appalling and removed it.
Let's read from that product, page 4 of that product. By the way, the copy you gave us, when can we get a copy that doesn't have all these redactions on it? So we can actually see what the American taxpayers were paying for to see their rights, their First Amendment religious liberty rights attacked. Let me just read from page 4. Provide new opportunities to mitigate extremist threat through outreach to traditional Catholic parishes and the development of sources with the placement and access to report on places of worship. That's pretty fancy language for they're trying to put informants in the parish, in the church. That's what this memorandum said, Director, from one of your field offices. And you won't let us talk to the people who did it. Any response to that?
I didn't know. I was waiting for the question.
No, priests. Do you think priests should be informants inside the church, Director?
We do not recruit, open, or operate confidential human sources to infiltrate, target, report.
But that's not what this said. It sounds like you were trying to do it in Richmond, Virginia.
No, sir. No,
You
sir.
weren't? If this didn't happen, you can assure us that this didn't happen.
That product did not, as best as we can tell, result in any investigative action as a result of it. None.
You know what the motivation for this was? Why would they even think about doing this? You know what the motivation was?
Well, again, I think that's what our internal review will find, and I'd rather wait until I hear what the results of that
Well, I don't need an internal review. I can read the document. I assume you can do the same, because it says right there on the same page. Richmond assesses extremist interest in radical traditional Catholics is likely to increase over the next 12 to 24 months in the run-up to the next general election. Same paragraph. Events in which extremists and radical traditional Catholics might have common cause include legislation, judicial decisions in such areas as abortion rights, immigration, affirmative action, and LGBTQ protections. It's politics. That's the motivation. In the run-up to the next election, and they talk about the border, affirmative action, and abortion rights. It's total politics. I mean, I think it's interesting that we just got a decision from a bunch of Catholics who sit on the United States Supreme Court relative to affirmative action. Politics was the total motivation here, and that's what's scary. That's what's, I think, so frightening, and how this happens. I don't know. And 5 people signed off on it. 5 people, including the Chief Division Counsel at the Richmond Field Office. I'd like to talk to this lawyer. I mean, a lot of people in this room went to law school, get a course on the Constitution, talks about the First Amendment. I find that really scary. Again, when do you think we're going to have a chance? How soon are you going to complete this internal investigation so we can talk to these folks who put this together?
I expect us to be able to brief the committee on our internal review later this summer.
Will that briefing include the names of the individuals who put this document together attacking Americans' First Amendment liberty?
I'm not sure yet what it'll include because it's not done yet, but when it is, we'll provide you with an appropriate briefing.
What are you doing to fix it so this doesn't happen again?
Well, we've already started putting in place a number of fixes, and those will be further informed by the results of the
What are
review.
those fixes? More training, more things, more. It's that same thing you told us on FISA. And while you may have some improvement, you still got 204,000 times the database was illegally searched. So what are the training and procedures you're putting in place?
Well, I'll put the FISA stuff to the side.
Well, I'm just using that as an example of where you've told us the same thing, you fix something, and you haven't.
I do not believe the number that you just invoked on the FISA side is since the reforms, the fixes, as you called them.
Can we get an unredacted?
Those post-date the numbers that you're referring to.
Director, can we get an unredacted copy while you're still doing this internal investigation? Can we at least get an unredacted copy of this memorandum?
I will find out if there's more of the document that can be shared with you. We try to be very careful in what we redact, and there's always a basis for it. So let me go back and see if there's more that we can provide. But I know my instructions are to be as sparing as possible in the redactions that we provide.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Director, I think it's quite rich that the guy that has accused you of lawlessness and weaponization is 400 days into violation of his own congressional subpoena over January 6th. Quite rich to me that you're hearing all these allegations from somebody who won't even respond to a lawful subpoena. But I want to talk more about your workforce because that's where you started. A couple weeks ago at the Bureau, you had Family Day. Can you tell us what Family Day is?
Family Day is an opportunity for employees from really all over the FBI. It tends to be primarily from the nearby geographies because of the trip that they have to make. Employees to bring their families into FBI headquarters so that they can see a little bit about the place their loved ones work and why mom or dad is spending so much time away from home.
You see any little kids at Family Day?
Many, many, many. It's an opportunity for us to say thank you to the families. We talk a lot in law enforcement about sacrifice, but the reality is that law enforcement officers and professionals are sacrificing to do what they love. Our families are sacrificing because of who they love.
And what would you say, in your experience, is the number one worry of a little kid about a mom or dad who is a special agent out in the field?
Obviously, they're worried that their mom or dad won't come home at night because they've been killed, and that, in fact, has happened, unfortunately, all
Happened in
too
Fort
often.
Lauderdale a couple years ago, is that right?
Laura Schwarzenberger and Dan Alphen, two of our agents, killed in a connection with a child exploitation case down there. It was the single darkest day I've had in this job.
I want to turn your attention to an organization called Marco Polo. It's run by a former Trump aide named Garrett Ziegler. Over the past couple weeks, he has doxed the addresses of a former special agent connected to the Hunter Biden case. He has put up the dates of birth and pictures of two current special agents who work for you. He has said the name, which I will not say, of an assistant U.S. attorney who worked in the Hunter Biden case, that she will answer for her crimes. He will focus everything on her. Justice will be done. It's out of my hands, but she will answer. Do these types of threats and doxing concern you about threats to your workforce and what it can mean?
Well, obviously, what we're most concerned about are the actual acts of violence, which themselves have happened, and as we just discussed. But this kind of phenomenon, doxing, is itself hugely problematic because the more information, personalized information about law enforcement professionals that are out in the internet, the more people who may be unstable or inclined to violence there are out there who can choose to act on it. And we're seeing that all too often. The number of officers across law enforcement killed in the line of duty has been up alarmingly over the last few years. And I know that because one of the things I committed to doing early in my tenure was every time an officer anywhere in the country is shot and killed in the line of duty, I was going to personally call that sheriff or that chief and on behalf of the FBI express our support and condolences and relay that to the family. And I have done that now close to 400 times since I've been in this job.
Thank you for doing that. You don't only do that, you send your SACs, your special agents in charge, to their funerals as well. I've seen that. Chairman, I've counted in this hearing, and we're only about an hour and a half in, the use of the word laptop about 20 times. And in fact, in the chairman's opening statement, he said that he's upset that he believes the FBI prevented more Americans from learning about a private citizen's laptop. That is bananas to me. You all are bringing up FISA every single question. You're essentially saying to the American people that you're guardians of personal security and privacy. But the 2020 election was determined because the FBI didn't let more Americans see a private citizen's non-consensual nudes. Is that what we're saying here? That you lost the election not because of your ideas, but because a private citizen's laptop
Do you want an answer?
wasn't out there?
We
That's bananas. Like, you should be a party of ideas, not a party of non-consensual nudes to help you win an election.
Will you yield
It
for an
seems
answer?
like that is what the objection is here today. We should be talking about the mass shootings that occurred over the last 10 days. Instead, this hearing has turned into absolute chaos. I'm going to yield back.
Time of the gentleman's expired. We bring up FISA because it's up for reauthorization, if the gentleman didn't know, at the end of this year, and it was in our witness's opening statement. I didn't bring up the laptop. The
Whose time
judge
are you
last-
speaking? Whose time are you speaking to, Chairman?
The judge last
Point of order.
week on
Whose
July
time are you
4th,
speaking?
brought it up.
Point of order. Whose time are you speaking on?
I'm speaking on, I'm not a point of order, and I recognize the gentleman from Arizona.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Director, thanks for being here. Who is Matthew Graves? Who is Matthew Graves?
I believe Matthew Graves, at least the person I'm thinking of is, I think, the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia.
That's the person I'm thinking of too. Are you aware that he has promised more than 1,000 more individuals will be charged or indicted related to January 6th?
I had not heard that he had said that.
But it seems arbitrary, and there's reports that it's kind of a quasi-quota system that he's put together for January 6 prosecutions. Do you approve of targets, goals, quotas in prosecuting alleged criminal conduct?
Well, certainly not quotas. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, goals is a little bit more of an ambiguous term, but
Certainly not quotas.
certainly not quotas.
Do you know if any of your personnel at the FBI is involved in the investigations promised that will lead to indictments by the January 6th quota established by U.S. Attorney Graves?
That doesn't sound familiar to me.
In June 2021, you told this committee that a small group of people at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th had, quote, all sorts of weapons. Do you remember being here for that committee hearing and testifying that way?
In general, yes.
It has been reported that more than 40 FBI personnel, agents, or contractors were in the crowd on January 6th. Is that number accurate?
I don't know if that number is accurate.
Former Capitol Police Chief Stevenson reportedly has asserted that the protest crowd was filled with federal agents. Are you aware of his assertion?
I am not.
Would you agree with him that it was filled with federal agents on January 6th?
I would really have to see more closely exactly what he said and get the full context to be able to evaluate it.
How many agents were actually agents or human resources were present in the Capitol complex and vicinity on January 6th?
Well, again, it's going to get confusing because it depends on when we deployed and responded to the breach that occurred.
How many were under
federal agents?
Sure.
No.
Yeah, you're talking. You and I both know we're talking different things here, and please don't distract here because we're focusing on those who were there in an undercover capacity on January 6th. How many were there?
Again, I'm not sure that I can give you that number as I sit here. I'm not sure there were undercover agents on scene.
Okay. I find that kind of a remarkable statement, Director. At this point, you don't know whether there were undercover federal agents, FBI agents in the crowd or in the Capitol on January 6th.
I say that because I want to be very careful. There have been a number of court filings related to some of these topics, and I want to make sure that I stick within what's in.
I understand that, but I thought I heard you say you didn't know whether there were FBI agents or informants or human sources in the Capitol or in the vicinity on January 6th. Did I misunderstand you? I thought that's what you said.
Well, I referred very specifically to undercover agents.
Yeah. And so are you acknowledging that there were undercover agents?
As I sit here right now, I do not believe there were undercover agents on scene.
Any
FBI
assets?
agents.
Did you have any assets present that day in the crowd?
When it comes to what you're calling assets, or what we would call confidential human sources, that's a place where, again, I want to be careful. Much as I said in response to an earlier question, there are court filings that I think speak to this that I'm happy to make sure we get to you, assuming they're not under seal, and that can better answer the question than I can as I sit here right now.
In the same June 2021 committee hearing, you told us that the FISA court, quote, approved FBI procedures, minimization procedures, collection of procedures, querying procedures, did not find misconduct, close quote. That's what you said. Specifically, you said the FISC found no misconduct. Yet 3 months later, the Inspector General found widespread problems in FBI's FISA applications, raising serious questions about the FBI review process of applications, including hundreds of examples of noncompliance with Woods procedures, for example. And we know that from December 2020 to November 2021, the FBI conducted 3.4 million warrantless searches of U.S. data under FISA. 3.4 million. up nearly triple the amount of the previous year, and it got worse as you were telling us there was nothing to worry about. But now your reforms have produced about reduced it down to 119,000, over 200,000 total, but 119,000 discrete Americans. That just doesn't seem like you've accomplished much there if you have 119,000 illegal searches and queries under FISA. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The House Judiciary Committee is responsible for helping to ensure the rule of law. Unfortunately, this chairman ignored a bipartisan congressional subpoena served upon him. The actions of this chairman have undermined the credibility of all congressional committees in seeking information from witnesses and have undermined the rule of law. Now, Director Wray, thank you for your public service and for the service of the brave FBI agents. I'm going to ask you a series of basic questions to get facts out to American people about our system of justice. Trump advisor Roger Stone was convicted in a federal court, correct?
That's my recollection.
Trump donor Elliot Brady was convicted in a federal court, correct?
Also my recollection.
The Attorney General at the time for those two convictions was Bill Barr. Which president nominated Bill Barr for Attorney General?
President Trump.
Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen was convicted on two separate occasions in a federal court, correct?
I believe that's correct.
The Attorney General at the time for Cohen's second conviction was Matthew Whitaker. Which president appointed Matthew Whitaker as acting Attorney General?
President Trump.
Trump's former campaign chairman Paul Manafort was convicted in a federal court, correct?
Yes.
Trump's former deputy campaign manager, Mr. Gates, was convicted in a federal court, correct?
That's my recollection.
Trump's campaign foreign policy advisor, George Papadopoulos, was convicted in a federal court, correct?
Yes, he pled guilty, yes.
The Attorney General at the time of those three cases was Jeff Sessions. Which president nominated Jeff Sessions for Attorney General?
President Trump.
You were the FBI director for all of those cases at the time. Which president nominated you?
President Trump.
What these facts show is we don't have a two-tiered system of justice. We have one Department of Justice that goes after criminals regardless of party ideology. All of these folks were convicted under the administrations of three separate Republican attorneys general. It is not the fault of the FBI that Donald Trump surrounded himself with criminals. Donald Trump brought that upon himself. Thank you to the FBI for exposing the cesspool of corruption of these Trump associates. Now, I'd like to talk about efforts by MAGA Republicans to defund the FBI. I think it'd be useful for the FBI to explain to American people what your missions are and how critical they are. So, again, a series of basic questions. The FBI's mission includes counterterrorism, correct?
Yes.
And that means the FBI works to stop terrorist attacks on American soil, right?
Yes.
The FBI's mission also includes counterintelligence, correct?
Yes.
And that means the FBI works to stop espionage of American companies and organizations. Is that right?
Yes.
The FBI's mission includes stopping cybercrime, right?
Correct.
The FBI's mission includes stopping public corruption, right?
Correct.
The FBI's mission includes stopping weapons of mass destruction from being detonated on American soil, right?
Yes, we work with others on it, but yes.
The FBI's mission includes going after organized crime, right?
Yes.
You go after violent crime, correct?
Yes.
You also go after white-collar crime, right?
Yes.
The FBI's mission also includes going after child sex trafficking, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Republican members of their caucus, including members on this committee, have asked to defund the FBI. One member of this committee from Arizona wrote that the FBI, quote, should be defunded and dismantled. What would happen if the FBI was defunded and dismantled?
We would have hundreds more violent criminals out on the street, dozens more violent gangs terrorizing communities, hundreds more child predators on the loose, hundreds more kids left at those predators' mercy instead of being rescued. Scores of threats from the Chinese Communist Party being left unaddressed, hundreds of ransomware attacks left unmitigated, terrorist attacks both jihadist inspired and domestic violent extremists not prevented that would succeed against Americans. Single seizures of fentanyl. It is not uncommon right now for a single FBI office in a single operation to seize enough fentanyl to wipe out an entire state. So many more of those lethal doses would be sweeping the country. We have close to 400, I think it is somewhere between 300 and 400 investigations into the leadership of the cartels trafficking that fentanyl. So you would have a significantly greater threat from the southwest border from the cartels. So those are just a few things that would happen. Ultimately, the people most hurt by some ill-conceived effort to defund our agency, the people most hurt are the American people that live in every district represented on this committee.
Thank you, Director Ray. Another gentleman protecting Americans. Gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley is recognized.
Good morning, Director Ray. I'd like to take you back to 2021. In many parts of the country, schools remained closed month after month for no good reason. Once schools did nominally open, many instituted draconian testing and quarantine regimes, such as once student is possibly exposed to COVID, everyone goes home for the week. Children as young as toddlers were subjected to harmful mask mandates that defied international norms. The way some students were treated truly shocks the conscience. Just consider a few examples from my own state of California. A school district in Davis sent an email to parents announcing that their children would be required to eat outside in the rain to reduce exposure to COVID. A school in Sonoma County made young children chew with their masks on, explaining this was to minimize the time spent unmasked. Some schools in Los Angeles limited students to one bathroom break per day and barred them from drinking water outside of the lunch period. A school in the San Ramon Valley made students eat lunch on the ground. In October of that year, the American Academy of Pediatrics would declare a national state of emergency in children's mental health, citing dramatic increases in emergency department visits for all mental health emergencies, including suspected suicide attempts. In the face of this, the Biden administration decided to take action. It mobilized the sweeping powers of federal law enforcement. But it wasn't to spare kids from such cruelty, rather, it was to target the parents who were speaking out against it. The administration coordinated with the National School Board Association on a letter that began with the alarming claim America's public schools and its education leaders are under an immediate threat. The letter cited a handful of news stories, almost all of which involved purely expressive activity by parents at school board meetings, and called such activity a form of domestic terrorism. The letter called for the full counterterrorism and law enforcement powers of the federal government, including authority granted under the Patriot Act, to be mobilized to investigate, intercept, and prevent such activity. The Biden administration was ready to take this letter and run with it the moment it was received. After all, administration officials had participated in its drafting. Within 5 days of receiving it, Attorney General Merrick Garland fired off his infamous memo directing federal action in response to a, quote, disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence against school administrators, board members, teachers, and staff. In response, the FBI opened 25 assessments against parents and even created a new threat tag. Director Ray, did Attorney General Garland consult with you or the FBI before issuing that memorandum?
I can't get into discussions that did, or maybe more importantly, did not happen between the FBI and the department in advance of the...
Why do you say more importantly did not?
Well, because I will say to you the same thing that I said to all 56 of our field offices as soon as I read the memo, which is that the FBI is not in the business of investigating or policing speech at school board meetings or anywhere else for that matter. We're not going to start now. Now, violence, threats of violence, that's a different matter. We're going to work with our...
Right, so that's what the memo was predicated on. And what I'm asking you, was there any evidence that you provided to Attorney General Garland that supported that predicate, that premise that there was an increase in harassment and threats of violence?
I'm not aware of any such evidence, but I know that we've had a number of our folks who have been up here for transcribed interviews. So unless some of them shared it, I'm not aware of any.
Well, actually, what they've shared with us points to just the opposite. You had, for example, a letter from Christopher Dunham, acting assistant director in March of this year, where the FBI acknowledged that it has not observed an uptick of threats directed at school officials since it began tracking the data. Does that sound accurate to you? also true that according to the FBI itself, none of the school board related investigations have resulted in federal arrests or charges?
I think that's correct. I think of the 25, and for context, that's 25 tips.
I'm sorry, I have limited time, so if that's correct, I'd like to move on. This committee's investigation concluded that the Justice Department's own documents demonstrated there was no compelling nationwide law enforcement justification for the Attorney General's directive. Do you have any reason to dispute that conclusion?
No.
So we had an investigation of parents. We had a sweeping mobilization of federal power against the most protected core First Amendment activity, the right of citizens to speak and petition their government on the most important of issues, the education of their children. And you are telling me that the entire basis for that, there was no evidence to support it.
Well, I want to be clear. We, the FBI, as I said, did not investigate people for
Should
exercise.
Attorney General Garland rescind the memo?
I'm sorry?
Should Attorney General Garland rescind that memo?
Oh, that's a question for the Attorney
Do
General.
you believe he should?
Again, that's a question for the Attorney General.
Do you believe that the Attorney General should apologize to parents who are the subject of that memo?
I'm not going to speak to that.
Will you apologize for the FBI's own role?
I think the FBI conducted itself the way it should here, which is that we've continued to follow our longstanding rules and have not changed anything in response to that memo.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes